Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the launch and webinar on Dreams Realized, Dreams Deferred, a research publication by the Center of Research on Islamic and Malay Affairs, or RIMA. My name is Johannes Aziz, and I will be the moderator for this evening's session. This evening, we are set to discuss findings of a research project by RIMA aimed at understanding the lagging behind in educational achievement experienced by the Malay community by zooming in on the lived experiences of former students from the normal technical stream in secondary school. We're delighted to have with us the primary researcher of the project who will present his findings, as well as two discussants who will subsequently provide their perspectives on those findings from the policy and community perspective. And we hope for active participation from you viewing us online. Please feel free to send us questions and comments for our panelists to respond to during the Q&A session later on. Without further ado, let me now invite the chairman of RIMA, Mr. Muhammad Nazim Muhammad Hussein, to deliver his opening remarks. Mr. Nazim, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. It gives me great pleasure to welcome everyone to our virtual book launch and webinar discussing the latest research publication, Dreams Realized, Dreams Deferred, Understanding and Addressing the Racial Gap in Educational Achievement in Singapore. This publication is the fruit of a 4-year labor featuring findings from a collaborative research project between RIMA and Associate Professor John Donaldson from the School of Social Sciences at the Singapore Management University, or SMU. The project, which was commissioned by AMP Singapore, aimed to understand the educational achievement of a specific strata within the community. As education is seen as a primary conduit in social mobility, it remains a concern for the community, as it is an area in which the gap between the different ethnic groups is most pronounced. While the Malays have achieved better educational qualifications over the years, the educational attainment gaps with other races continue to persist. One area of concern is the Malays are overrepresented in the normal, technical, or NT stream. This is where our research came in. Through the project, our researchers have conducted in-depth interviews with more than 100 low-income adults representing the main races who had spent time in the NT stream to get a sense of their life experiences and trajectories. Our research explored factors that could explain the education gap, as well as intervention and pathways that have allowed some MT stream students to succeed in achieving their dreams. Traditionally, we have gone upstream to address issues. Programs build upon preventive measures. Perhaps it is time, as PM Lee mentioned in his National Day Rally 2021, to pay extra attention to students who have fallen behind, not only to understand the well-researched and documented reasons why this is so, but also uncovering the reasons why and how others who fell behind have managed to realize their deferred dreams, to recognize the different pathways to success. Equally intriguing, is ethnicity and culture a factor for the underachievement? This evening, we have with us the primary researcher and author of the publication, Professor Donaldson, to discuss some of the key findings from the research and explore possible intervention to support NT students from diverse backgrounds and ability to achieve their aspirations. He will be joined by two other panelists. First, Dr. Mardiana Abu Bakar, a lecturer with the Policy, Curriculum and Leadership Academic Group at the National Institute of Education, or NIE. Secondly, we have Dr. Teng Xiao Si, a research scientist at the Center for Research in Pedagogy and Practice from the NIE. The sessions will be moderated by Dr. Johannes Aziz, a member of the Executive Committee of RIMA. A famous thinker once said, "Education is our passport to the future for tomorrow. For tomorrow belongs to those who are prepared for today." It is our hope that this research will contribute towards the design of effective interventions and support our Singapore students with diverse backgrounds and abilities to achieve their aspirations. I look forward to a fruitful discussion and your active engagement. With this, I declare the publication Dreams Realized, Dreams Deferred launched. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nazim. And with that, we officially launch our latest research publication, Dreams Realized, Dreams Deferred, which is of now available for download from website www. Printed copies of the publication will also be distributed to Malay Muslim organizations or MMOs, non-MMOs, institutes of higher learning, and other academic institutions. Before we turn our attention to the speaker and discussants, I would like to once again invite viewers to enter your questions and comments in the comment section of our live stream page. We will try to address as many of them as practicable during the Q&A section towards the end of this webinar. We will now invite our primary researcher and author of the publication to share the key findings from the study. Professor John Donaldson is an associate professor of political science at Singapore Management University, or SMU. His research interests include the politics of rural development and poverty in China and elsewhere. To wit, he has conducted extensive fieldwork in rural India and Thailand, as well as Singapore. Over the past decade, Professor Donaldson has authored and co-authored numerous journal and conference papers, as well as other academic publications on issues such as poverty reduction and politics in developing countries. Professor Donaldson has also served as a senior research fellow with the Lian Center for Innovation, working with the SMU Change Lab to research and design innovative solutions for unmet needs in vulnerable communities in Singapore. Professor Donaldson, please.
Well, thank you so much, and it's a real pleasure to be here this evening. Give me just 1 second to share my screen, and let's see. Try to access. I think I made a mistake, and now I cannot share my screen. The icon in your iDress. For some reason, I'm having trouble sharing the screen. It worked perfectly just a little while ago. Yeah, I'm having trouble with the. Oh, I see. Okay, good. I think this will work now. Yeah, just 1 second. Thank you so much for your forbearance. And can everyone see the screen? That the title of the report, as you just heard, is Dream Realized, Dreams Deferred, and the goal is to try to understand and address the racial gap that the chairman just mentioned. And as you can probably tell, the title evokes a poem by Langston Hughes, and writing about 100 years ago, making the point that when people's dreams are deferred, it has impacts that ripples not just personally, but across society. A very important question. And when we got together with RIMA, my co-author and I, what we heard from them was that they felt that they really were focusing on getting people out of the normal technical stream, the tuition and other kinds of support. But what they knew less about was if people stay in the normal technical stream, why do some do better than others? Why do they have different kinds of outcomes? Why are some able to realize their dreams, whereas others have their dreams deferred? But as we were collecting and interviewing, what we discovered is that we could also address another question, the first question, which is what factors explain the education gap among Singaporean ethnic groups? And so it's this question that I wanted to turn to first. Now, one of the things that's very important is that this is a very sensitive question, and I realize that. And so I'm going to ask your forgiveness if I accidentally offend someone or say something that may be out of line. But I am also hoping that we can have a very frank conversation, because this is one of the big issues, as the chairman pointed out, facing the Malay community, but it's also one where there's been a lot more heat than light. And so the point of this project is to try to test the kinds of guesses and things and statements that are said out there. But here's the problem, is that, as the chairman said, that although the Malay community in terms of educational achievement has done much better, they're still overrepresented in the secondary and the post-secondary non-tertiary area, increasing in terms of numbers in university, but still compared to other races, not doing very well. And if you think about this, what could explain it? You could probably make a long, long list of candidate factors, things that could explain that education gap in theory. And so what we did, we interviewed more than 100 adults who had gone through the normal technical stream in order to test each of these kinds of guesses, looking one by one and tracing the connections between these kinds of factors and the overall outcome. And the problem that we discovered is that only some of these were related to entering normal tech. Only some of these were factors in terms of entering normal tech, and some were unrelated. And at the same time, some of these factors were systematically related to race, to the Malay interviewees, and some of them were not. And so some factors were linked to our, found more often in our Malay interviewees, and some were not. And the problem is that the overall pattern is that the factors that are related to the Malay interviewees are not the same as the ones that are related to getting into normal technical, to the normal technical stream. And so we went through so many candidate factors, and the truth is we couldn't answer our question, because the evidence was either this factor is important for normal technical stream, but it's not found very commonly or in disproportionately with the Malay interviewees, or vice versa. The Malays have this factor more, but it doesn't seem to be a factor in terms of why they were streamed into the normal technical stream. And so, but what we were able to do is to disconfirm, although we couldn't answer the question, we were able to provide evidence that disconfirmed some common hypotheses. And let me tell you about the most sensitive one, and that is about motivation, determination, aspiration. I think in terms of normal tech itself, people believe that normal tech people are not, students in the normal tech are not very motivated, not very determined, and perhaps they don't even have dreams and aspirations at all. But, and this is the sensitive part, there's also a stereotype about Malays. And being a foreigner here, but being, having lived here for 16 years, it's hard to avoid hearing these kinds of stereotypes. Malays are not focused, they're not hardworking, and that this trait is cultural and thus immutable. Culture can change, but if it's really cultural, then it should not be able to change very quickly. And I think we're all familiar with this Malay stereotype. And the exciting thing is that with this, these interviews, we can test this among the other factors that we looked at. And so what does the evidence say? Of the 105 people for which we had information to answer this question, it turns out 73 of them reported that they did not study diligently for the PSLE. They were goofing off, they weren't studying very hard, and that's one of the most common ways to not do well on the PSLE, is to not study. The interesting thing then is that most, but not all, reported not studying diligently for the PSLE. An interesting puzzle is what explains the 32, why the people are studying but not doing very well. And we'll talk about that when we talk about question number 2. But notice there's nothing in this table about race. And so let's split it apart by race. And when you do that, you can see that the 73 are basically evenly distributed, not disproportionately distributed. 33 Malays didn't study, but 14 did. 40 non-Malays didn't study, but 18 did. There is no pattern in terms of race itself. So in normal tech students, many of them don't study, but there's no pattern that maps onto Malays. What about the second aspect of this? What about later on in life, after the PSLEs? Do some of these patterns change? Do people suddenly become, or later become, motivated? Is it changeable? And if you look at the number 73, and you look at these first 2 rows, some of them didn't, but many of them subsequently became focused. They started working harder after the PSLEs. And that also, those 48 are distributed among the races. There seems to be no difference between Malays and non-Malays. So if my normal tech students going into the PSLEs were not necessarily that engaged, subsequently, many of them did. This trait is not immutable. It can change. And then the interesting thing, if you think about the Malay stereotype, out of the 105 people we talked to, only 9 Malays really fit that stereotype. That is consistently off their line. They until we interviewed them, they didn't seem to be focused. They didn't seem to be that hardworking and all of that kind of thing. But there were many of them who were consistently focused or were focused after the PSLEs. And then looking at the non-Malays, there were 16 of them who actually fit the Malay stereotype in every way, except that they weren't Malays. And so there doesn't seem to be this kind of a pattern that would explain, that would map race onto this kind of phenomenon. We were not able to use, to put any support behind the idea that Malays are harder working, less harder working than other races, and or that it was some kind of a cultural and therefore immutable sort of factor. And in this way, I hope you can see that we went factor by factor and looking at this, we failed to answer the question about what factors explain the education gap. But the good news is we were able to show evidence that's inconsistent with a lot of the major guesses. So it's still an open question. What explains the education gap? What we can say is that our evidence does not support the idea that of a Malay stereotype or any of these other factors can systematically cause it. Okay, now that's in terms of research question 1. And so we identified a whole bunch of, just to sum up, we identified a whole bunch of factors, but they weren't related to race. That the Malay interviewees did not exhibit these any more than any other race, and so we couldn't answer the question, but we can say confidently that the evidence is inconsistent with any kind of cultural stereotype, economic deficits, and other kinds of factors that are often often discussed. Okay, now what about question 2? That was the question that we went in to actually study. If we think about, okay, let's continue to focus on people in primary school. Let's try to give them tuition so that they test well. But what about the people who end up in the normal technical stream? Once they're out, some of them do well, some of them don't. And what explains that variation? And so if you think about normal technical secondary school, sometimes I think about it this way. Imagine that you're walking along the beach at night and maybe you're not paying attention and all of a sudden you fall into a hole. Okay, now you have a problem. You're in a deep hole. How do you get out of the hole? Well, you've fallen into the hole. So you're an expert in terms of how to fall into a hole. But unfortunately, that insight is not going to get you out. It's not like you can fall upwards out of the hole, right? And so there's 2 things that we need to identify. One is, how do people get into the normal technical stream? And then once they're in, how do the ones that do well, that do end up succeeding, what factors explain that? Now, in terms of the way into normal technical stream, we found 5 factors that appeared over and over again evenly distributed among our Malay and non-Malay interviewees. And the hard part about all of these 5 is that each of them, and there's overlapping, of course, but each of these 5 are in the same classroom. And the poor normal technical teachers, each of these have different needs, different concerns, and other things like that. And the poor teacher has to figure out how to provide these various needs for these very different kinds of people. And among those people who get into the normal technical stream from these pathways, many of them go into this negative kind of vicious cycle, a spiral that ends up, they lose hope, they end up in a very bad situation. And so these are the people that we labeled as having dreams deferred. But some people, and so let's look into, for each of these factors, we can provide some insights. So for instance, hands-on learners. These are people who really are very, very smart, but just not book smart. They're hands-on learners. They want to get their hands dirty. They love fixing things and things like that. And so the weird thing about normal tech is that we've streamed them into the normal tech and we're just telling them, do what you're not, what you don't feel inclined in, continue this academic learning, but we'll just do it more slowly, and we'll tell you you're stupid at the same time. And so these hands-on learners are being asked to do the same things that they're not necessarily all that good at. But when and if they go to vocational school, these hands-on learners often feel inspired because all of a sudden they start to excel in something. I can't tell you, it was very surprising how many people got turned on in ITE and other kinds of vocational kinds of situations. And these are our hands-on learners. So what does this mean? It might mean that we could increase the number of vocational subjects earlier. And so that normal tech is no longer just trying to only focus on academics, that for hands-on learners, we might be able to increase the numbers of vocational subjects. And I know that there's reforms in this kinds of areas as well, but also that we could modify teaching styles that might resonate better with hands-on learners who may not be very good in terms of book smarts, but have other kinds of intelligences that we can play to. The late bloomer, on the other hand, is academically inclined, but hasn't started to apply themselves. In many ways, they're kind of play. They often find normal tech boring or too slow, and therefore they go into this vicious cycle. And some late bloomers that we talk to, even now, have yet to bloom. But those who do bloom, those who do find them inspired, is usually because they found some kind of a passion, or they had some kind of a maturation event, just normal maturation. They started to focus a little bit more. After all, in Singapore, we're asking very young students to be very, very focused in order to prepare for the PSLE. Some people mature later. And one of the key factors there was national service or other kinds of maturation. But some sorts of counseling or preschool access should help some of these late bloomers to focus earlier. Some are also, they have family dysfunction. So their academic troubles, they're trying to work hard, they're academically inclined, but they're weighed down by life. And if the trauma continues, they can start to lash out or maybe check out, not study very much. But with help, they can often start to climb the academic ladder. So if you have the same people with very similar trauma, one person gets help, the other person doesn't, you can easily predict which one is going to end up with better life outcomes. Counseling, social work, intervention help these people quite a lot. The fourth one, undiagnosed learning disabilities, is more of a suspicion than a smoking gun, because we had very few interviewees who said, I've been diagnosed with a learning disability, but we suspected it based on the interviews. These people get internalized messages that they're stupid or whatever, but really they may be facing learning disabilities, and they continue to struggle both in normal tech and in ITE. And here, I think the Allied Educator Program can be augmented and more resources put into them, and that Singapore could consider testing more normal tech students to see, or people in danger of hitting the normal tech stream, to see if they might have an undiagnosed learning disability. And finally, some people who are weak in English, they're speaking languages or dialects at home, and this can very quickly be a vicious cycle of frustration. For these folks, oftentimes more preschool and the preschool access that is increasing in Singapore, or some forms of extra language support might help them. And so again, with these insights, how do people get into the hole in terms of that normal tech? But then we said some people did better than others. How do they avoid the vicious cycle? We found that there were 5 major pathways out. And again, these are the people who had their dreams realized. They were able to achieve their dreams. And so we can go through these very quickly one by one. One of them is that somebody unconditionally believed in them. It was often a teacher, could be a social worker. Oftentimes it was an extended relative like an aunt or an uncle. But interestingly, there was not a single case of somebody who unconditionally believed in them who was set up by a VWO as a mentor or anything. It really has to be organic. Or for instance, showing an example of a high flyer, somebody who really succeeded. None of those really helped these people. This has to be some kind of an organic relationship. And so here, I think when teachers and social workers are encouraged to believe in their students, it really does make a difference. Oftentimes, the teachers themselves don't even realize it, what a difference they have made. They really can make a difference when they unconditionally believe in a student. Second, these are people who found their passion. Oftentimes, these are hands-on learners. In a job setting or in vocational school, they'll all of a sudden find their passion, something that they're really good at. But one thing that we found is that when people had a passion early on, they were often discouraged or they were barred from pursuing their passion. This could be for many different reasons. Some of it was related to gender, but other kinds of factors that would discourage people from pursuing their dreams. Maybe their parents had different dreams than they did and other things like that. But when they were allowed to pursue their passion, all of a sudden they started to take off and started to succeed. And so here, I think we can encourage parents and teachers that they and relatives to identify those passions in children, even when they took some kind of a test that said what are their aptitudes. Some students really resonated to that. Financial aid. This is an area that we're doing pretty well in. But what we discovered through our study is that it made a difference in almost every case, but it didn't make the entire difference in any single case. Not a single case was this enough. So what I say is financial aid, very, very important, is utterly vital, but it's insufficient. Let's not pretend that financial aid is enough. Oftentimes this is from self-help groups, from VWOs, from the schools themselves. One thing that really helped is when bonds, financial aids, were tied to a student's passion and allowed them to get access to a job that they were passionate about. But we also found many who, for a whole bunch of different reasons, fell through the cracks. And so here, I think we need to keep it up, but we may need to consider loosening the criteria to prevent people from falling through the cracks, because there's a lot of people that we talked to who really needed financial aid. Many of them got it, but some of them did not. Fourth, institutional support and flexibility. And what we mean by this is second chances, even third chances, even fourth chances. And an example of this is in ITE. IT has very flexible majors, and even if I don't qualify, and almost anybody can qualify to get into ITE, even if I don't get the kind of program that I really am passionate about, ITE often has a pathway to allow them to work up to it. If you do well here, then you can gain access to this. So this becomes a second chance and even a third chance. If they misbehave or some kind of problem, there's social workers at ITE, and they'll often find themselves with third and even fourth chances. So here, one of the prescriptions that we thought of was to make normal tech more flexible, and that's part of the reforms. But the key there is in terms of the details of those reforms. Will it be flexible enough to give those students second and third chances? When people were dissatisfied with ITE, it was almost invariably because they did not get into their program that they wanted, that matched their major. They wanted to be a baker, but they got into computer, or they wanted to be in computer science or computer studies or some kind of electronics, but they were put into baking, something like that. You can see what I mean. And so the mismatch major still becomes kind of an issue, but for many people, ITE was a real turn on. And finally, a wake-up call. This is another, just like the unconditional love, that cannot be forced. There was no example of kind of tough love. But oftentimes a wake-up call, a relative gets sick or they get into serious trouble or something like that. It can create vicious cycles. But when there are supportive parents and friends, they help greatly. Social workers help greatly. And this wake-up call ends up creating a virtuous cycle, and was one of the major pathways that students traversed in order to get out of the hole. 5 pathways in, this is the big picture. And once they're in, many of them never come out. They go into this vicious cycle. But there's also these 5 pathways out with very specific ideas in terms of that. And I just brushed over it because there's an entire report that you can read for the details. What factors explain why some normal tech students, including Malays and others, end up with better outcomes than others? And these are the reasons why. That generally speaking, we should prevent the 5 ways in, and we should figure out ways to encourage the 5 pathways out. One thing that we discovered in our research is that normal tech students, oftentimes people say, oh, they don't dream. But we discovered that most of them have a dream and a passion. But for many of them, their dream and their passion are not recognized or acknowledged or encouraged. And this happened over and over again. The boy who wanted to be a dancer, the girl who wanted to go into electronics. Sometimes it was gendered. Oftentimes it was that parents had different dreams or didn't think that the students' dreams were good enough or something to be aspired to. But once they grabbed those passions, they really made a difference. ITE, you've heard that it's the end. This is not your grandfather's ITE. What we discovered case after case is that Singapore has one of the best vocational systems, including Poly, but also ITE in the world. And it's a place where especially those hands-on learners really found their passion. But the problem is that upon graduation, many of them struggle to generate enough income. The jobs on the other side are not remunerative enough for people to raise families. And so that is a real dilemma that Singapore continues to face even as vocational gets better. In terms of racism, we documented a number of racist incidents that knocked some people off their game, but usually these were after PSLE, and there were a lot of reasons for that. Like young children don't really know when things happen, they can't really report it, but later on we had several people who did experience racism. In terms of gender, there were lots of issues all the way, both for boys and for girls. And then finally is about the impact of reforms, because I think most of us know that the normal tech stream is being reformed as we speak. As we were studying it, it felt a little bit like studying the waves in the ocean, right? As soon as you write stuff down, things were changing. But what is the impact of those reforms? Are they going to change some of the problems, some of the issues that we found in our study? And fortunately, we have a couple of experts in our panel who can talk about that much more intelligently than I am. I want to thank you so much for this. It's a more than 100-page report, but it's designed to be very readable. You can dip into subjects and the data and other kinds of analysis are there. I really want to thank you. I want to thank AMP. I want to thank RIMA. I want to thank my co-author and literally a huge team of other people who have supported us in this research. And I also want to thank you, the audience, for being such a great audience. And now I think we can turn to our panelists for discussion. Oh, Mr. Johannes, I think you're muted.
Oh, so sorry about that, everyone. Thank you, Professor Donaldson. Thank you for the presentation and the many insights from your research. Right? From Professor Donaldson's presentation, we heard how the educational gap is experienced by the Malay community. It's not just about an economic imperative; it's about people's lives, about people realizing their life goals and fulfilling their dreams, having that sense of fulfillment as they lead their lives. In the research, also debunked many common misconceptions or false beliefs about why students can sometimes do badly in our education system and end up in the lower tracks, the lower educational tracks, like the normal technical stream. Professor Dawson found that even with some of the factors do correlate with lower achievement, right, they do not tend to be culturally specific, not linked to culturally specific traits, and that they are basically the same factors experienced by normal technical students from other ethnic groups as well. In some, there's not a lot of support to map racial differences on differences in educational achievement. And regardless of the racial background, the ethnic background of entering the normal technical stream, right, Professor Donaldson found that some would enter a vicious cycle of lost hope and even poor outcomes. Whereas, however, for some of those that did have their lives turned around, most would have some interventions in their lives of various kinds, whether financial or otherwise. And so perhaps important for us now to look at how we can make some of these interventions, whether financial or otherwise, more common, more ubiquitous for a larger proportion of students, and also to help students find their passions from early on, right, which tends to stimulate their life pursuit of their dreams. Next, we have Dr. Maidiana Abu Bakar, a lecturer with the Policy, Curriculum and Leadership Academic Group at the National Institute of Education, or NIE. Dr. Maidiana is also the program leader of the Master of Education in Curriculum and Teaching degree. In this role, she teaches and partly administers the 4 programs on curriculum policy and theory, as well as an elective on curriculum implementation. A critical scholar interested in issues of curriculum access and equity, Dr. Maidiana believes that schools are places of both possibilities and constraints, and her main passion is to contribute towards the nurturing of self-critical communities of reflexive educators. Dr. Maidiana, please.
Thank you, Johannes. You can hear me, I hope. All right. So, good evening, everyone, and thank you also to Professor Donaldson for the very clarifying presentation on the work that you have successfully completed, and for which I congratulate you and the team of researchers and writers from SMU and RIMA. This is a significant book that has taken 4 years to complete, as the chairman pointed out. And its significance lies in its contribution to the still difficult and complex conversation on this issue of the normal technical stream graduates and their possible place in futures in our society. I think as we um, are doing this book launch, we actually stand on the cusp of change because the normal technical stream will be dismantled in 3 years' time and it will be replaced by full subject-based banding in all our secondary schools. I'm very pleased to be at this book launch to provide some insights from a teacher educator point of view, as well as to um, provide my. I just love the title of the book. I think the poetic title, and which begins with dreams realized and dreams deferred, is a very hopeful one. But I have some um, things I'd like to add in terms of both history and the current reforms. So here goes. I think let me begin by saying that the report centers on an issue which a wicked problem. Some of you may have heard the term, and I think the phrase wicked problem in planning and policy is a problem that's difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, and the changing basket of variables that are often difficult to recognize when examining the wicked problem. Okay, and a wicked problem refers to an issue that cannot be fixed, where there is no single solution to the problem, and the wicked denotes resistance to resolution rather than evil. Although some parts of the normal technical issue has some connotations of evilness about it in terms of stigmatization that has come into play in the self-worth and the learning identities of normal technical students. Now, a wicked problem also refers to a problem whose social complexity means that it has no determinable stopping point. All right, because there's complex interdependencies of the basket of variables. I think the effort to say solve one aspect of the wicked problem may reveal other problems. So I'm very happy that the book, I think one of the achievement of the book, and I'm sure you heard from John's presentation, Professor Donaldson's presentation earlier, that the research was able to disconfirm many of the stereotypes and the cultural stereotype issues that has been haunting the normal technical students, right? I think the metaphor of getting in the hole and out of the hole sounds rather wicked in another sense of the word. But I digress. So let me get back. Let me tell you a little bit about the history of the normal technical, okay? Because I think that will also give us a good background as we move to reading this significant book. Okay, so the backstory of the normal technical stream. Of course, history always has lessons to teach us. And the history of the normal technical stream, although it started in 1994, its history goes back to a 1991 IPSE report. And the IPSE report, IPSE stands for Improving Primary School Education report. And that report was jointly shared by the Director of Education at the Ministry and the Director of VITB. ITE was still known as VITB until 1992. It became ITE after also the IPSE report, Improving Primary School Education report. Now, one of the things I want us to also look at, because the book that has successfully been written provides us with, and I think the book authors are aware of this, a frame understanding of the normal technical graduates. But we also need to look at their learners' identities before they move up to the normal technical stream. I'm very glad that the data collected has shown us that as students move, and I think there are few wonderful case studies, the vignettes in the book that shows that some students found themselves in the normal technical stream, right? Because the curriculum as well as some of the pedagogy that they were able to, that they were afforded, made them found their place. Others had to go to ITE before they found themselves some success as learners. Okay, so the IPSE report, coming back to what I was saying, acknowledge that the present education system, way back in 1991, had served the majority of pupils of average and above average ability, that makes up 80%, but had not been as effective in helping pupils in the lowest ability range. And these are 20% of each primary school cohort. So that was their confession, that they were not really able to help pupils in the lowest ability range progress up the educational ladder. And therefore, the IPSE committee proposed that primary schooling be reconceptualized as a 4-year foundation and a 2-year orientation stage. Okay, so that's why they moved streaming after the IPSE report to primary 4. Before that was primary 3. Okay, and the very unfortunate names of normal, extended, and monolingual streams were replaced by the more neutral sounding EM1, EM2, and EM3 streams in primary school. And the IPSE, as a result of the change in the primary school streaming system, also saw to the setting up of a new stream at the secondary school 3 years later. And the purpose of the new stream at the secondary school is for, this is what the report on page 18 says, less able students to move up from the primary school. Okay, so I think some of us may know that in the early days when it was still VITB, pupils were being transited or sorted or selected into VITB after primary school. So the purpose of the normal technical stream, this new technically oriented option in secondary school, was to allow pupils at least 10 years of general education before being channeled into technical vocational education and training at the end of their secondary education. So ITE also became a tertiary institution as a result of the IPSE report. Okay, so with that background in mind, let me return to the book. Okay, so I think the subtitle of the book is Understanding and Addressing the Racial Gap in Educational Achievement in Singapore. And I think the book, to its credit, tried to answer two huge questions. And as Prof. Donaldson very humbly declared, they were not able to answer the first research question. But what they were able to do, and I think this is just as significant, is to disconfirm that the cultural stereotypes cannot stick. And I think that's very important for us to remember as we push the discourse forward. Okay? And I think it's very important for us to remember that the word discourse is very important. And I think the reason why I say discourse is very important is that, according to one of my favorite theories, it says that we are what we construct our discourse to be. And I think it's very important for us to now, even as we stand at the cusp of FSBB, to make sure that we change how we look at the discourses of the lower and the lowest performing students amongst us. And as you have seen earlier, I think Prof. Donaldson has also come up with a list of 12 variables. Again, the whole idea of wicked, right? 12 variables that may, but then may not, because it's disconfirming and testing the data, not explain what we've always thought to explain. How students get into normal technical, but more importantly, I think what we need to put behind us is the disconfirming of the cultural stereotypes. Okay, so I think the important two questions at the heart of the book is also what causes students to be streamed into normal technical stream, and what has helped some to achieve their dreams and aspirations despite the challenges. And I think firstly, the book has answered the call for more facts. So now we have data, right? And the book has an impressive number of 44 tables, right? To try and understand why Malays disproportionately find themselves streamed into normal technical stream. So again, if you look at the book, and I'm very impressed by the many tables there, because like Donaldson claimed, and I agree, the book is easy to read, and yet it provides you with enough substance to construct new discourses around the disconfirming of cultural stereotypes. I think each chapter of the book offers general patterns, many hypotheses that they then discuss further and they then disprove, but also vignettes from case studies. And I think the lives that the case studies shows are also very important. And like Professor Donaldson has outlined, the four broad outcomes are those with their dreams realized and their dreams deferred, and in between these two categories are those who are at the crossroads and those who are just making do. Okay, and I think as we move forward too, because I'm quite hopeful about the full subject-based banding that has come upon us, and that will be in all schools by 2024. But I think my main concern, because it's an enduring issue amongst us, is that underachievement, like the book pointed out, and frustration can trickle down to future generations. Okay, and I think Professor Donaldson also refers to the low pay, and I think if you look at the book, one of the statistics that the book shows us is that ITE fresh graduates receive a monthly salary between 1,649 to 1,936. And that, according to Professor Irene Ng from NUS Social Work, is a conservative poverty line for people, for two parents and two children. So I think that's a very sobering reminder. And I think that's another great thing about the book. It reminds us of the dimensions we have to look at. Okay, so once again, one of the things I'd like to also point out, and again, I love the fact that there are many tables I can chew up on. And the first table, for instance, is the table that compare race compared to outcome vis-a-vis aspiration. And it does the dreams realized, crossroads, making do, and dreams deferred. And you find that the Chinese, Malay, Indian, in the categories, the four categories, shows that the results are inconsistent with the hypothesis that Malays are the ones who have their dreams deferred the most. Okay, because if you look at the statistics, about 41% of Chinese have their dreams realized, the Chinese respondents, and about 40% of the Malays respondents, the NT respondents, have their dreams realized as well. So the disconfirming is very heartening. Okay, and I think there are many other things that I find affirming about the book, and I think one of which is the fact that, and I think, again, I think you know by now that the IPSE is one of my favorite reports because it was very honest in its assessment of the education system. The book found that one of the research findings of that Professor Donaldson and team came up with is that about 1/4 of the sample had to have their dreams deferred regardless of race. And I think that's a class issue and not a race issue that we need to look at in the Singapore situation. Okay, and the other findings in the book that I find really heartening as well. Like 80% of their interviewees had an aspiration at some point in their life, irrespective of race, and this throws away a lot of the deficit perspective that normal technical students do not have aspiration. I did my PhD on primary school streaming, and I had a student, a respondent, who wanted to go to an elite girls' school, but she doesn't know how to, and she's not going to because she was getting in primary school, we have this thing called the U grade. That means it's ungraded. She was getting ungraded, but she has aspirations to go to an elite school. So the gap between her aspiration and how she's going to get there and the reality is just so different. Okay, and in the book also you find some very wonderful case studies. Like I said, one of my favorites is the cheeky vignettes they had, asking which one is a Malay respondent, which one is a Chinese respondent, by looking at the stories of their lack of motivation. All right, folks. So, this is not just Koyok Cell, but I want to let you know that there are many findings in the book that will help you to think about the lives, not just the statistics, because although there are 44 tables, I think there are many lives that are told here as well. Okay, and I think they are nuggets of finding, like how 2/3 of the sample that they worked with were not especially hardworking during their PSLE years, but approximately 2/3 subsequently became determined at some point in their lives. Okay, and the book also, and Donaldson made apologies about this, but I think one of the things that they were able to disconfirm is the whole idea of mixing, peer influence of mixing with Malays. Does it hurt Malay performance? Okay, so, and I think it even quoted one of our minister in charge of Muslim affairs who made an unfair comment about negative academic influences Malay students had on one another. So I really like the nuggets of disconfirming facts that have been surfaced in the book. Okay, so looking at the success factors, I think I would like to also note that the unconditional support of someone, as well as institutional flexibility, are two very important factors, and I think we need to remember that. And I think, again, the sample is 105, so it's not very large, so I think it's time for us to do more research. And as we stand at the cusp of FSPB, how do we then research students who go into doing mostly, if not all, G1 subjects? In the new FSBD, G1 is the normal technical subjects. Okay, so actually for me, the report has surfaced for us that there's still a lot of work, but that we can put some goals behind us. The goals of cultural stereotypes is something that we really need to put behind us. I'm sure it will be ongoing, but how do we completely put it behind us? It's with research such as this. And I'm very happy that each chapter provides hypotheses that the team then disproves, and with all the facts and the literature. Okay, so now coming back to the normal technical stream, I think since it set up in 1994, a major reform was done in 2000. I think there were bridges and pathways, what the ministry refers to as bridges and pathways, that was set up. And I think it has continually done so. And I think with full subject-based banding, the main purpose of subject-based banding, as Ong Ye Kung, Minister Ong Ye Kung underlined, is that his hope is that from 3 education streams, we will now have 1 secondary education, many subject bands, and that will no longer have fishes swimming down 3 separate streams, but one broad river with each fish negotiating its own journey. It's a very sanguine hope. Um, And I like to think that the policy, will have to give the policy its chance. I like to think that it will work um, a few generations down, perhaps. But for now, I think the current and enduring issues with us is how do we make sure also that in future our Malay students are not overrepresented in the G1 banding in secondary school. All right, so very quickly, I think I've run out of time. I think even as I once again congratulate the team for completing this report, and as we move forward into yet another new reform that will dismantle the normal technical stream in the normal technical and post-normal technical era, I think we have to look at and about the identities and the struggle for self-worth and roles as citizens that our lowest performing students are allowed to take on. Now, we are not alone in this issue, because I think in 2017, one researcher in UK, the researcher's name is Bathwater, also noted that those who do not progress to university higher education in UK, but go on to further vocational education and training or work, tend to be from disadvantaged and lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and who face lower funding and greater complexity in their choices in future. So who goes where and who does what are, I think, very crucial conversations that we need to have. And I think at the self-help group level, and AMP is one of them, I think we need to look into perhaps, I mean, now it's very difficult to talk about leveling the playing field, although the ministry now has MOE kindergartens to do that. I think tuition remains at a divide, but also I think there's still a divide, and I will say this as a teacher educator, amongst the different schools. We do have all schools in Singapore are good schools in some ways, but there's still a divide in terms of the achievements in terms of academic. But I like to think that there are pathways and trajectories that are being provided for our future FSBB students. All right, folks, so I'm going to stop here. I think I've said what I need to say. Thank you very much for listening to me and for inviting me here. Johannes, over back to you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mariana. And our last panelist for this evening is Dr. Teng Xiao Si, a scientist working at the Center for Research in Pedagogy and Practice in the Office of Education Research, also at NIE. She has led funded research studies on areas such as youth, intercultural mindedness, school-to-work transitions, and life pathways of working students. She is currently a co-investigator in studies on the educational involvement of immigrant parents and students' funds of knowledge. Dr. Teng, please.
Hi, a very good evening, everyone. Thank you, Johannes. First, I'd like to thank the organizers, AMP RIMA, for inviting me to this book launch. I appreciate the opportunity to dialogue with the panel here today. Thank you, John, for the very succinct research presentation earlier on, and also my fellow discussant, Madiana, for her insightful comments. Educational gap in Singapore is a very important topic. And as a society, I think we are increasingly concerned with issues of social equity, social mobility, and stratification in Singapore. So against such a climate, I think it's quite delightful to see works like this, Dreams Realized, Dreams Deferred, on NT students, as well as Lavanya Balachandran from NUS, her work on Tamil educational marginality, which were both recently published. I think it's quite exciting that there are more works in this area of underexplored research terrain. John's book is a commendable effort. I think it really takes a lot of work, getting a lot of interviewers, leading a lot of interviewers to recruit and interview the participants. I think that's not an easy task. And also, I think that probably for the interviews, you need much effort in terms of ensuring the consistency of the human instrument. I agree with Madiana that a key merit of the study is the inclusion of students of different ethnicity when we talk about NT learning experiences and pathways. I think this shows, like the disconfirmation of myths and stereotypes. I think that's a very important thing that we have to tackle, especially when I think a lot of scholars would find that deficit thesis, right, is a huge issue to tackle in education, right, to address the education gap in terms of the implementation of policy and practice. Okay, so Madiana has focused most of her discussion on the book per se, right? And also she has given us a very good historical contextualization of, how ITE came about, the vocational route, or how it was changed in the 90s. And so for me, I think I will position this differently. I'll position the book as a study on an unexplored research area in Singapore. So I would relate it, to other studies that I know of, to other observations, that arose from research, and maybe also some other possible points to think about, to deliberate on as we attempt to contribute more to the piecing of the jigsaw puzzle of this big thing called underachievement. Okay, so I'll start with a couple of questions for John. Really, it's to help me understand better the presentation of findings. So because as a qualitative researcher, I'm quite used to reading analysis with maybe more case studies, quotes from interviewees, thick descriptions, and maybe also definitions of terms that could be subjectively interviewed by the interviewees. So perhaps currently it's not that clear to me, terms like say better outcomes, was that more of the interviewee's definition, or was it the interviewer's definition? And also what were the considerations, when you chose this sort of way of presenting the qualitative research findings? Yeah, that's one. And the second one, you talked about the pathways in and out of the whole, and I think some of them really resonated quite a bit, because I'm conducting this study with Madiana and a few other team members on the life pathways and school to work transitions of ITE graduates. So I think quite a number of them do appear in our preliminary observations. And I say preliminary because we are still quite early in our study. We can't claim to have consolidated any analysis. But I think the in terms of the pathways, I think you talk about them one by one, right? I wonder if because usually when we look at the lived experiences of these students or these youths, it's usually a combination of factors that contributed to the challenges. So I'm just wondering if you have observed whether certain combinations make it harder, to get into or get out of the hole. So that's another question. The third one is more of an observation. Your findings pointed to the pathways into the hole. So I think one point was on like how some of the learners were more hands-on, right? Hands-on learners, more practical, practice-oriented. And then there's another one about them being late bloomers. Yeah, so I think I think it's quite important to like sort of find the right diagnosis, right, in order to locate the right solution. But what I really want to comment here is that this reminds me quite a bit of our preliminary observations for the ITE studies, where we hear comments from a number of the older cohorts of graduates, right, who had gone on to acquire a degree or even higher degrees. But interestingly, in their account of their whole educational trajectories, they would tell us, I'm not academically inclined. I am not a theory person, right? Which begs a few questions. One, why do they feel they are not academically inclined when they have already went on to pursue a degree or even a higher degree, right? Two, is this a question? Is this a stigma that they have internalized? And why, despite the fact that they've gone further, they could not get out of that, thinking. Then third, could they have taken a shorter route if they had received more appropriate support at an earlier age, say, in secondary school or even younger? Because as John's findings show, right, ITE seems to have a very supportive environment. And I think from our preliminary observations, that's what we hear as well from quite a number of the students. But perhaps we hear less of similar sentiments about supportive environments from, say, secondary school. So yeah, these are some questions that pop into mind. But I think I would have to, or my team would have to go further into our study to see if our data offer more findings lend themselves to further deeper analysis. Okay, then I think oh yes, the one of the factors that lead students into the whole are the institutional barriers, right? So I think there was some mentioned of a few institutional barriers, but I think maybe that could be complemented with some of the other key what I would call, like, say, key features of the structure of schooling, right? The structure of schooling, like NT, the streaming feature itself is one important aspect of the structure of schooling. We call it the structure of schooling because it shapes schooling experiences. It shapes your curriculum, the pedagogy, the how teacher think of you, teachers' expectations, and of course, your peers' interactions. But as Madiana also explained just now, we are on the cusp of the SBB implementation. We are facing quite new changes. I think our educational changes is sometimes hard to keep up if you have not been observing, developments within a short period of time, because there's quite a bit to follow up on. So with SBB, I would be thinking about, like, what are the possible, so how does this mitigate the previous some of the previous perhaps features that we associate with NT. So if we dismantle NT, I think one thing we want to look into, apart from social mixing, which I think that has been emphasized a lot, right? And also apart from, say, the delivery of lessons, the teaching of subjects, I think something that we probably want to investigate or keep in mind is whether the curriculum differentiation, whether teacher and school expectations, and here what I mean by teacher and school expectations, that could include career, that this could influence career guidance, encouragement, or this encouragement towards certain options, academic options, right? And also, of course, resource allocation. So these are some of the things that are associated with streaming. So after we've dismantled that, so what happens to this? How does all these develop, right? Keeping in mind that we are now facing a rather diversified landscape. We have various school types, and we have like specialized school, autonomous schools, specialized independent schools. We have specialized NT schools, right? So there are a lot of in terms of school choices, in terms of the options offered to you within these schools, in terms of the pathways that students need to navigate. We are really placing a lot of onus on the students themselves to navigate the terrains, right? So how do we gauge the extent of any discrepancies in schooling experiences, and how do we mitigate that, right? Because you can dismantle different things, or we can reorganize things, but we just want to make sure that we are able to still handle or rather manage underachievements, right? And help those who may need the support. So that's one. And then when I was looking at, quite briefly looking at, say, Lavania's work on Tamil educational marginality, I thought it's kind of interesting to look at John's work and Lavania's work, because actually both have suggested in different ways, the need to look at intersectional identities, right? I think Madiana just now also kind of briefly alluded to that, how socioeconomic status and ethnicity might come together to shape the experiences of students, right? And I think very often we tend to prioritize one identity over the other, but if you are the learner himself, herself, you've never separate identities, it's still within you at any point in time. So as a learner, your identity functions in the classroom, outside the classroom, right, in similar ways. So we have to look at that. We have to look at how intersectional identities shape schooling experiences. And something that I note, which is a bit different perhaps between Lavania's and John's work, is I think Lavania talks a bit more about racialization, right? Because she thinks that racialization is a structural thing that affects the marginality of the Tamil low-income students, right? And whereas I think for John's case, we didn't really go into that, but at the same time, it's kind of interesting because by debunking, the myths, sort of like saying that like race is not important here. But I think these are very interesting variations, and I welcome all these variations in research, because the more we go into them, the more we realize what is vital or important to look at when we talk about underachievement. So and then Okay, one point I think I like to point out when it comes to supporting students from low income, as John mentioned earlier, one of the key feature for students who fall into the hole, right, is that they're weak in English, right? I think many other studies also show that low performance tends to come from low income families and non-English speaking families. So the attention has been quite consistent in terms of, like, giving them as much support as possible when they're younger to um, build up their English language command, and there's nothing wrong in that. But at the same time, I think it's perhaps worth thinking also about how we can include their mother tongue language, right, in the learning. By that, I don't mean, I hope people are not starting to think about the logistics, how are we going to do that? We have so many diverse languages in class, and if, like, this is a Chinese teacher or a Malay teacher, how is this person going to teach using other languages? I wasn't thinking so much of a very strict and implementation, but it's more about how you allow some space if, students um, bring in or speak in their mother tongues, or if they think that somehow their mother tongue languages could help in their learning of English, right, of other subjects. Because I think it's research has shown that say immigrant minority students, right, when they come in weaker in English, they lose confidence when they are not able to um, use their mother tongue as their ethnic languages, and they also get a bit less motivated, when they feel that their heritage is not respected, and this creates a bit of a crisis in the young learner's identity, given that we are polyglossia, where many languages exist side by side, and that we would hope, future Singaporeans be bilingual, if not multilingual, and also respect our cultural heritage, then I think perhaps we need to start thinking about giving more space. Okay, I think this has also been discussed by, I think, OECD, the Council of Europe, where they came out with, not that they came out, but they kind of promoted this term, right, plurilingualism, right, based on extensive research talking about how, this would bring about linguistic and cognitive benefits to learners. Okay, so yeah, so I think that's about it, and I think in consideration of time, I think I will stop here. Thank you very much for the time, and yeah, back to you, Johannes.
And thank you, Dr. Tung. Um, I would like to thank both our discussants for their insightful rounding out of our discussion of the topic at hand today. Right? We heard from Dr. Mariana how, for example, it's important to recognize that the issue of low education achievement is a wicked problem, right, made out of many crisscrossing variables, and therefore there's no easy answers, no singular solutions, no determinable stopping points. Right? We all heard from her that it's important to recognize the diverse needs of different students and how it's important to match curricula and pedagogies to those diverse needs. And we also heard from her how we should go beyond racial lines, how it's important that Professor Don's study has disconfirmed some of the traditional stereotypes and biases that have been used to explain the educational gap with the uh, for the Malay community, and how some of these problems should actually be looked at because they are class issues. They represent differences in class lines that go across races and ethnic groups. But of course, it's also important, right? And for me, this is personally something I would second, that it's important for the Malay community itself to go beyond the internalized stereotypes and stop uh, perpetuating the stereotypes with biased speech, biased behaviors that go against our own interests. And then from Dr. Teng, we saw how she shared with us some of the preliminary notes from her own research with post-ITE students, right? For example, the issue of internalized notions of not being academically inclined, and how that affected the students even as they go beyond ITE into further studies. And looking back, perhaps then we should see how their achievement might mean that perhaps they should have taken shorter routes, right, rather than the long way that they had in order to go to institutes of higher learning. Dr. Teng also went through some descriptions about our schooling structures, right? How the subject-based banding might be able to be successful in mitigating some of the negative effects of the streaming system that's going to become obsolete, but also perhaps some of the issues that might uh, uh, come up with the new system. She also shared with us how we now have diverse options, much more diverse options, much more diverse pathways from different types of schools that are available. But at the same time, we still need to be able to manage underachievement, educational underachievement. And so perhaps important to still look at teacher and school expectations, right? How schools and how teachers and school leaders are able to offer guidance in career choices, in choices, next steps in students' educational pathways, and of course to look at support from families, especially the low income and non-English speaking, from those from low income and non-English speaking backgrounds. And with that, I would like to thank all of our panelists, our speakers, and our discussants for their insights on the subject. Once again, I would like to inform the viewers that the study report is available for download from RIMA's website, www.rima.sg. And with that, we've come to the Q&A segment of our webinar. Right? And let's look at some of the questions we have from our audience. Okay, welcome back, Professor Donaldson, Dr. Rana, and Dr. Teng. Perhaps we might start with the first question that came in. I think might be a good place to start. And this is a question from Lo Eugene. He firstly thanks Professor Donaldson for the presentation. Says, while the findings do show that the common stereotypes about Malays are not true, they do not answer why Malays are overly represented in a normal technical stream, right? How are you hoping to use the results to change this trend? Are there plans to delve deep into finding out why this trend exists?
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrific question. We went into the study without actually knowing the answer. And I think that's, pure academic research. You go in with the question, you don't know the answer. And sometimes, sort of in my arrogant, when I get the most arrogant, I think of myself a little bit like Sherlock Holmes. Now, you notice that I don't look anything like Benedict Cumberbatch, but sometimes I like to think of myself, as Sherlock Holmes-like. And so you have a question, a puzzle, which is, why is there this gap? And then you arrange all of the candidates, all of the suspects, right? One of you is a murderer, and you go through them one by one. And as we did that, we looked around and we said, gosh, this doesn't seem like it explains it. This doesn't seem like it explains it. This doesn't seem like it explains it. And we ended up without, knowing why. But from the candidate's point of view, from the suspect's point of view, they're off the hook. And so there is a good result in terms of being able to rule out a whole bunch of different factors that turns out not to be important. As the discussants were talking, though, I was thinking about one major issue, which is this issue of class. And we were able to analyze that to a certain extent. So, for instance, in terms of outcomes and other issues like that, there didn't seem to be a particular pattern. One pattern that we saw is that the Malays that we talked to had lower incomes, but in terms of our selection, we were talking to low-income people who grew up in poor families. And I think our report cannot really test the question of class and its impact in terms of streaming. To do that, you would need to look at people who end up in a whole bunch of different streams and come from a whole bunch of different income factors. What we were able to do, though, is trace low-income family getting into normal tech, and there was no clear pattern. And then low-income family outcome, again, no clear-cut pattern. But a comprehensive study that looks across income and also looks across stream would be needed. I think no study is going to answer all of those questions, but what we can do is say that it does not seem to have, when you trace all of the different factors, it can disconfirm some of the stereotypes that we have.
Thank you. And there's a second question that's coming in, and actually it's a comment asking for views, and I think perhaps all three of our speakers today might be have something to say about this particular comment. So Aisha Muhammad Qasim, thank you very much for your question, for your comment. She says, more often we have looked at interventionist measures, and despite these efforts, the outcome still differs. Perhaps we can take the outcome as given and look at how we can support them upstream, such as career coaching and entrepreneurship, right? And she's asked for reviews. I think what she's trying to say is that perhaps we should take the educational achievements patterns as we see today as a given and concentrate our efforts downstream rather than upstream, actually, when students are making transitions into and give them support in that area.
Yeah. I maybe Aisha can clarify the question a little bit more, and I know Mardiana and Chelsea also have something to say about this for sure. But I'll just say very, very briefly that if I understand the question right, this is kind of what we were trying to do. You have very similar people with very similar backgrounds. They go into normal tech. One of them does well. One of them doesn't do well. What makes a difference? And it is these kinds of things like career coaching and different kinds of support that made a difference. Somebody who believed in them, helping them identify their passion, dealing with financial problems that they encounter, and other issues like that. But I don't know if it really answers Aisha's question. I think also Dr. Mardiana had something you wanted to say. Oh, sorry, you're muted, Dr. Martin.
Thank you, John. Aisha, I think we do need to go upstream, and by upstream I mean go all the way back into before primary school, because as you know, our education system is a very competitive and rigorous one, and when you hit primary one, if you do not have the level playing field afforded by a good background of English-speaking parents, resources such as a library at home, and tuition perhaps, you will form a learner identity in P1. In fact, I think anecdotally we've heard stories of P1 children getting learner failure identities. And I think it's very important for us to make sure we stem that. So we do not only need to work downstream, we need to work upstream all the way at kindergarten level even, to make sure that when they hit primary one, they're ready, because the expectation at P1 is that you must have a certain level of literacy in English and certain levels of numeracy. And I've been told by teachers in school that if you're on the learning support program for math for the first 2 years of your primary school, your chances of going to normal technical in secondary school, there is a strong correlation there. So we must go all the way downstream, not just upstream, because by then you would have formed, and I think Johannes used this word, internalized sense of learner identity and possible future selves that may not help you in future, right? You not only become a late bloomer, but you may have internalized yourself to be a failure. And I think that's very important. Thank you. Xiaoxi, do you want to say something there?
No, I don't have anything additional to add for this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, speakers. And I would like to just second the last thing that Dr. Maidana said just now. I think it's very important to prevent, some of these more negative learner identities from taking hold in the first place. We don't have any more questions coming in from the chat, but there is one pre-existing question from the staff here at RIMA, and perhaps this is a little more practical, a little bit more pragmatic as far as Singaporean parents are concerned. So, if a parent says, "How can my child succeed when he or she just seems so hopelessly unmotivated in his or her studies?" How can we address these concerns from parents, from the real life problems that parents often talk about?
I think it's a question for you, John.
I was hoping it was a question for someone else because it's a really, really good question. I think, Professor Tung also sort of mentioned this issue, which is school structure, something that our study really can't get into because there's no variation or other things like that. But one thing that strikes me, and frankly, this is as a Westerner, is that I've lived here in Singapore for 16 years, and one of the things that strikes me is that we are expecting a lot of kids at a very, very young age, and that if you're not studying by the time that you're in primary 2 or primary 3, you're in deep, it's already a big problem. And so we found ourselves looking at these interviews, these expensive interviews, and labeling people as being immature, based on, at age 8 and 9. I mean, aren't you supposed to be immature at age 8 and 9? And so, those are sort of more fundamental issues that, and I think a lot of them are historical legacies. When Singapore really was a poor country, back in the 60s and 70s, didn't have a lot of resources, so that you focused resources really on the higher achieving students. And but now that we have more resources, is it possible to give more students second and third chances? And you're seeing second and third chances in ITE. You're seeing a little bit more flexibility in the streams, that once you're in a stream, a little bit more ability to move up. But then Professor Tongan also, one of the comments said the same thing, which is in many ways, many of the stories that we labeled dream realized were after 20 years of struggle. And can we shift some of those interventions earlier so that those dreams could be achieved much, much earlier, and that you can get that second chance, you can get that intervention earlier? Because in many ways, if you're saying dream achieved after 20 years of struggle, in many ways that is dream deferred, even though eventually you did get your dream. And so that was also another challenge. And Professor Tung also mentioned this, which is how did we decide whether someone was doing well or not, and how do we say, oh, this outcome is good or this outcome is not good? And that was a very, very hard challenge. And we ended up deciding with my students and with my collaborators at RIMA that we would do it based on their own dream rather than what we thought was a good outcome. And one thing we noticed, and a little bit surprised given what we had heard, is that the vast majority of people that we talked to did have a specific dream. Doesn't sound like normal tech, right? But they did have a specific dream. But many of them, it came later. Many of them, when they stated their dream, it wasn't supported in many ways. And so we, when we evaluated those aspirations, it was like nearly 70% of the people we talked to had a dream. But among those, about 40% of them had a dream that society might say is not a laudable dream. They wanted to be a baker. They wanted to be a mechanic. And we don't necessarily laud those. But if we are going to say as a society, there are many outcomes that we're going to label successful. Now we have sports school. Now we've got SOTA. If we're going to take that seriously, then I think that would encourage people whose dreams may not be sort of stereotypically you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to go to NUS or SMU, and be successful. That there may be many different pathways to success if we take dreams and aspirations, seriously, based on what the child or teenager or whatever said.
And I think it would help if there are less deficit perspectives on this group of students as well. I think one of my main pains in being a teacher educator is that we do come across some teachers who have quite deficit perspectives of the lowest streaming students. And I think, unfortunately, we also have parents. I mean, one of the reports in the run up to FSBB, there were a couple of reports done last year, I believe, and parents were interviewed, and you realize that some parents think students who perform badly are bad people. And I think that whole stigmatization, because you see, I spoke earlier about learner failure identity, and I think for me, ontology is a very real thing. In education, we always talk about epistemology, which is the theory of knowing, but I think ontology of students, the philosophy behind transforming and being, are things we really need to look into as well. For people as young as P1, I spoke to an NT student, Sec 2 NT student, just a couple of days ago as part of my research. And I think one of the things that broke my heart when she spoke to me is that I think I'm not good at studying. I stopped real studying in primary 6. And I'm like, but why? So you realize just internalize, and that led to a different kind of motivation structure altogether because of the internalization. Yeah, she wants to be a voice actor when she grows up, and she knows all the characters of enemy back to front. But her aspiration is very different. Yeah. So again, that's anecdotal, of course. Yeah, we need to do more studies. There's another comment by Noren Noor, Johannes.
Okay, thank you, panelists, for answers to that question. We do have a comment by Noren Noor. She says she's a good evening to the panelists, and as a parent of an NT student who is soon taking his N levels, educators have given a lot of app support to students. However, parents like herself keep learning parenting techniques and how to support and encourage their children throughout the educational lifetimes. She also says that her son has been struggling since primary school and always been looked down by other people. He has felt down, but with the support and encouragement from educators and his family, he's now is more confident in facing the future obstacles, even if he does go to DE. He has a dream as an architecture. Wait, hold on. As an architecture designer, and as parents, she and her partner to support his dreams. Right. Sometimes they are called up to school to speak with his form teacher, but they wonder what else they can do to motivate him.
Everyone gets it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mardiana.
No, I must say that I don't speak the language of psychology because my training is largely in sociology. So motivation is not really my language, but I think it's very important for the student to have a good sense of who or he or she is. And I think, Narayan, listening to your story, it seems that your son has a lot of support from you. But I think he needs to believe in, and I think this is one of the things that Donaldson talked about earlier. They must have small successes. I think that's very important for them to see that they can accomplish small successes. And when they do that, and I think in the research that CLC and I are doing in ITE, we find that when they feel like they can overcome certain obstacles, they can move on to the next obstacle. I think that's as much as I can offer. Thank you. John, you want to say something?
I think there were just two takeaways. I mean, one is that it's encouraging to see that this parent finds the teachers to be supportive, which is hit and miss when we talk to interviewers. So yeah, but it's interesting how one or two good and encouraging teachers can really make up for 10 or 11 even discouraging teachers, that teacher that really believes in the child. And then there's one thing that, again, as a foreigner, is kind of sad, but is like, if you hear even my own students saying, I want to be a lawyer. Okay, as soon as you get a B on an A level, that dream is gone almost, right? And so that's one of the really harsh realities of Singapore. Now things are getting flexible. Now you can get master's degrees in law and all of that kind of stuff. But certainly if you're in normal tech and you want to be a lawyer, your challenges are huge. But one of the things that we saw that really was helpful is, why do you want to be a lawyer? Oh, I want to help people. Okay, maybe there's other ways that we could do that. Social work, things that may be, because you don't want to close doors, but the truth is Singapore is very harsh and many doors really are legit closed. But are there other things? So if we did find some students going normal tech, ITE, Poly University, and they graduate from university at 32 and now their doors are open. Very rare. But another way to do it would be to say, okay, architecture design. This is somebody who is creative. This is somebody who likes building and construction. Are there doors that ITE could open that would allow this student to practice some of these kinds of things that are part of his aspiration as he's building? Not put university out of the picture, but things that could be realistic even at an earlier age that would capture the interest in architecture design. You kind of get what I'm saying, that there are programs in ITE that are related to it, and that may be what this person should be aiming for, at least for now. And then if they continue to prove themselves, keep working their way up, but their fallback is something that captures the essence of something that they're passionate about.
Yes. Okay.
What a great mom.
Thanks again.
Yeah,
yes, what a great
encouraging
mom.
those passion and
Yes.
Okay, wait,
There's one question from Kanan. Are we going to
providing a little.
How are we doing? Hi.
I think Johannes is frozen for a bit.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Oh yeah, now you're back.
Johannes,
So sorry
back.
about that. Yeah, right. Yes, so sorry about that. Okay, thank you again, panelists. And we're running a little bit over time, but I think we have one last question that we can have. And I think I'll invoke moderator's privilege here to give that time to Dr. Teng, who earlier had a few questions for Professor Donaldson, right, in her discussion. So I think it would be useful for us now to see what Professor Donaldson might have in terms of a reply to those questions.
Yeah,
Dr.
actually,
Teng,
both.
if you could,
Yeah, sorry.
if you could just run us by us one or two of the questions that you had earlier.
I think John answered one of the questions, right? The earlier one. Maybe
About
just
the outcomes.
yeah, that's right. I think maybe just the other one about how you talk about the pathways in and out of the whole, and because they were like discussed sort of in isolation from each other. I mean, like individually, independent of each other, right? So I'm just wondering whether you see combinations of factors, that appear more often and that sort of creating a cumulative effect in terms of challenge.
Yeah, they're definitely additive. And more often it's tough, right? Like as you both noticed, 105, and so you have 5, and then how often can different interactions, mathematically even appear? But so, for instance, you have somebody who is a late bloomer and they're experiencing family trauma, or is a hands-on learner and also has trouble with English or something like that. And obviously, those problems compound. The book does a better job in terms of talking about that in looking at these ways in, ways out in isolation, it doesn't, mean to imply that they are isolated, like one person has one problem and then one pathway out. But just the idea that for if you're facing more than one, it just means more intervention. It means more, and those who do succeed and overcome these multiple challenges is because they received many of the interventions that we talked about, right? That these interventions that we talked about, the things that actually worked, were usually from actual people who, or sets of people, more than one, who traverse some kind of pathway, kind of pathway out. One of the dilemmas that Dr. Tung talked about is still a dilemma. You talked about the student who, even if they go normal tech and then end up in university, still label themselves as not a book learner and all that kind of thing. Our focusing on hands-on learner was in some ways the opposite. It was like the enthusiasm of fixing problems, or creating something physical. And so I think about sort of Singaporean society. Actually, I would do badly. I was a late bloomer, but imagine a book learner, right, doing well at the A level. But if we changed the test and it was more of a hands-on learn, can you fix this car engine, right? Then the tables would be turned. And these are smart people. They're just smart in ways that I'm not, and I'm smart in ways perhaps that they're not. And so I think part of that is just the stigma that unless you're good, book smart, you're going to be down on yourself. But these are people, these hands-on learners are really, really smart, and they're really, really good. And many of them, when they hit ITE, it's like all of it. I don't know what's in the water over there at ITE, but they're like, at last, something I'm good at, something I can succeed at. And then they're surrounded by people who don't stigmatize them and all of that kind of stuff, and then they suddenly get turned on. And so we had a few cases that we talked to that ended up in university and all that kind of stuff. But the hands-on learners was intended to be more of a positive thing. Not people who were bad at academia, there you must be a hands-on learner, but people who really were excited by those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think the vignettes probably would do a lot more justice, right, to sort of show you the different factors or different challenges that accumulate. Yeah, I think that would be quite helpful. But I also like to talk about like what you alluded to. It's the forms of assessment, right? It's like we have standardized testing, and it's usually paper and pen, right? But we don't have a more diverse, because when we think about diverse learners, but we don't think about diverse assessment forms. That possibly could be something that we might, I don't know, possibly want to deliberate on, especially when we think, when I think nowadays we are trying to talk about skills, knowledge and skills, trying to make education more relevant to the workforce. Okay, there of course there are a lot of things to talk about with regards to this. But if let's say we want to acquire skills, that's one thing. If we don't have the relevant assessment mode, then possibly you won't be able to do that or incorporate that in our education system. So unless you go a particular route. Yeah. So
it
anyway,
strikes me
sorry, yeah, please go on.
No, sorry, just to add on to that you have one data point, PSLE. And that PSLE student could be, okay, I'm a hands-on learner. It could be, I have a learning disability. It could be, my parents are divorcing. And, therefore, it could be that when I turn 15, I'm going to be an A+ student. But right now, I'm a late bloomer, right? I'm not focused yet. And those are extremely different kinds of people. And, of course, you can have interaction. And just from that one data point, you can't tell which of these is. And that just underscores your point is, can we do more diagnosis at an earlier age? Why is this student doing poorly and leading up to the PSLE? Which of these factors is salient? What can we do about it so that they do end up succeeding on one level or another?
Right.
Okay. I think there's 2 points from Noralia on the comments page. Johnny, we have time to take them, or are we wrapping up already?
Can you hear us?
Sorry, yeah,
Oops.
okay, been having problem. What did Dr. Mahdi just say?
Hi,
The
Johnny.
one
There's a
I
comment from Noralia Norashid. She's made 2 points on the side. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Uh, I
So,
think we've run time.
okay. So I'm going to take the question in the interest of time because her question is: do you think SBB will have to mitigate some of the challenges faced by students who struggle academically? Um, Noralia, it's a hope, but it's not yet proven. So maybe Prof. Johnson and you guys from RIMA may write another book in 4 years' time. I think now one of the good things about banding, of course, is that it affords more variegated choices. But again, we have to look at the basket of variables. Can they make the good choices? That's one. And are they allowed to make the good choices? Because I think still, in terms of systems, some schools are not offering certain choices. And FSBB will have a logistical nightmare in many schools. Because if you read the media report, one school says it had to do the timetable 100 times to accommodate FSPB in their school. This is a pioneer school. So the hope is there, and I do take Minister Ong Ye Kung's pledge to heart that now we have one river. Although I think at the bottom of the river there's still rocks and superstructures we need to overcome because this the foundation stream students from primary school are not foundation, they're not called foundation anymore, but they are taking foundation curriculum and they don't have the curriculum knowledge. If you look at schools now, at the moment, one of the struggles of teachers are normal technical students who are doing NA subjects, normal academic subjects in math, for instance, but they don't have the curriculum knowledge because they didn't do the higher math in primary school. Okay, so again, we have a curriculum gap that schools are trying to bridge. So even as reform come about, there will be logistical issues, and I think Xiaoxi refers to it as racialization in the book by Lavanya, and I think we have not really spoken about it, but I think deficit perspective of minority students may not help the way we sort and select students into bands even, right? Because the banding will be perhaps not equitably done in terms of banding as much as streaming. Because you see, they get into NT to do certain subjects at Sec 1, but at Sec 2, they then get streamed into taking certain science and math and humanities subjects based on their performance. And that sorting and selection is done at the school level. So I think our school leaders must rise to the challenge of pushing past all the deficit perspective to look at the important issues of equity. Because 1 mark, sometimes 2 marks, or even 3 marks make a difference. Yeah, and as to your question about addressing income inequalities going hand in hand with addressing education inequities, I think that's a very difficult structural systemic issues to answer. And I think the research that's done by today's team has answered some of it. I think we have very good financial support in many ways. But I think, and this is something we need to research, that there is generational, normal technical and lowest performing situations and phenomena in the sense that the father went to monolingual, the son is now has done NT, and the grandson will now be doing mostly G1 subjects. So we have not done those intergenerational research, but I think the issue is there. Yeah, thank you.
Can I make a brief response to Kanan about how our economic structures have maintained or widened income gaps between vocational jobs and professional jobs, right? I think if I were to share a little from a few of our respondents in our ITE study, I think some of them did mention, right, that in spite of the fact that they're more experienced, if they only have if they don't have a higher degree, or if they don't have a degree, they will still receive a very like $2,000, $3,000. It's lower than, they're not recognized as professionals, right? So I think there is a hierarchy of skills or knowledge valued in our society. So even though we are talking about, we should acquire hard skills for, the relevant world out there, but I think we need to think about the remuneration. How do we remunerate in terms of the real world? Do we regard those skills as valuable as well, when you are in the industry? So as we think about the future economy, about needing so-called practical skills, we might want to rethink, what do we value? Is it just the brain, just the head, over the hands or whatsoever? Yeah.
And also the fact that it's largely credentials we're looking at.
Yeah.
Because credentials skills cannot purely be measured by credentials. It's something you have to show and do, rather than do a pen and paper test about it. Okay.
And it underscores Mariana's point too, which is that this is a wicked problem. You change one variable, and for good intentions, the entire. And so improving ITE, help one class of students. Those with family trauma, those who are late bloomers, get very frustrated in ITE. But those hands-on learners get really turned off, and that's really great. It was very, very positive to see. But then once they graduate, what are they facing? Are they in a career that they can support a family? And Singapore, that's a high priority, is that kids come along at some point and all of that kind of stuff. And that becomes another problem that if you don't solve, you're going to end up perhaps, with very frustrated people.
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
Okay. I'm afraid I think we're running out of time. I think that has to be our last question for tonight. I apologize to the some of the viewers with questions left in the comments. And with that, we have come to the end of our Q&A section. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all the panelists today for an interesting and stimulating discussion. I think we had more time. We can probably go all night talking about this issue. Unfortunately, we don't. And perhaps in a future webinar, future seminar, right, we might be able to continue our discussions here today. However, at this point, on behalf of the organizing committee, RIMA, I would like to thank all of our panelists and our viewers for joining us at this virtual book launch and webinar. We hope you found this session insightful, informative, whether you are a fellow academic, whether you are a policymaker, an educator, or a parent. Right? Once again, if you'd like to read the full research report, you can download it from RIMA's website at www.rima.sg and follow us on our social media platforms to keep abreast of our latest and upcoming publications and events. So thank you for tuning in, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.